Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. War crimes in Ukraine. More is emerging about what happened when towns around Kyiv were under Russian occupation after heavy bombardment. Ukraine's president is warning there are more shocking revelations to come. A panel to discuss the situation. Here in the studio, William Juliet, criminal and human rights lawyer. Thanks for being with us, sir.
Hi, Mark.
In Warsaw, we're joined by Maria Zolkina, a political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thank you for joining us. And Nikolai Petrov joins us from London, Senior Research Fellow at Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. First, the Ukrainian president is warning that the deaths in Bucha could only be the beginning. Volodymyr Zelensky says he has intelligence that even more civilians have been killed in other places nearby, such as Borodyanka. Bucha, Borodyanka, two satellite towns around Kyiv left destroyed by the Russian invasion, their residents traumatized.
A town in ruins just 50 kilometres northwest of the capital, Kyiv. Stunned locals make their way through the streets of Borodyanka following the retreat of Russian troops last week. Almost everything in this neighbourhood has been destroyed, the bodies of the dead left abandoned on street corners.
Ще люди під завалами, там дома біля налогової в центрі, там два під'їзди уничтожені. Аж вон, якщо видно, от дом стоїть, от подивіться. Вон, там два прольоти, там під прольотами люди.
Buildings are in danger of collapsing. Many homes have simply vanished. It's not yet known how many people died here, but the Ukrainian president is warning that the scale of the atrocity could be even worse than that inflicted on the town of Bucha, where graphic evidence of killings and torture has emerged following the withdrawal of Russian forces.
Вже є інформація про те, що у Бородянці та деяких інших звільнених містах кількість жертв окупантів може бути ще більшою. У багатьох селах звільнених районів Київської, Чернігівської, Сумської областей окупанти робили таке, що місцеві не бачили навіть під час нацистської окупації 80 років тому.
Ukrainian officials say the bodies of at least 410 people have been recovered since the army retook control of towns like this close to Kyiv.
Let's bring in our panel to discuss these issues regarding the war crimes, what happens next. William, I'll start here with you in the studio. What's emerging so far from your perspective, looking at this with a strictly legal analysis of these kind of things? Is it stacking up for you as something that will eventually end up in a war crimes tribunal?
I think it is. Evidence is building up, not only with the ICC investigators, but also in other countries. We just heard yesterday that investigations have been opened at the PNAT, the Parquet National Antiterroriste in Paris 3. There was already one regarding the death of the Franco-Irish journalist a couple of days ago. And we also heard that maybe a dozen of inquiries, investigations have been opened in other European countries, one in Sweden, a couple in other European countries, one or two on universal jurisdiction, other ones, as the French one, on the fact that citizens from these countries were targeted and as victims. So all these are criminal investigations ongoing in these countries. And we also heard that there was a meeting of Eurojust. They are going to coordinate all these teams, and evidence is going to be shared, and all that is maybe going to converge with what the ICC is doing. So we'll see who does what and when, but a lot of people are moving on to these scenes and gathering evidence. So, yeah, I think it's building up strongly now.
All kicking off with that ICC investigation, Germany getting on the back of that, France launching one too, as you say. And now it's all being considered and debated by NATO, of course, over the next couple of days. William, for now, thank you. Let's go to Warsaw. Maria Zolkina there. Maria, you've explained to me in the past that you're actually from one of the areas that's under great bombardment, eastern Ukraine. Clearly, you've got so many things you'd like to tell us, I know. What is your sense about what's happening where you come from?
So actually what is going on in the very east of Ukraine, namely in Luhansk and in Donetsk region, should be considered as the main developments of the following weeks and maybe couple of months, because not to occupy at least the whole Donbas together, Donetsk and Lugansk region will be the full failure for Russian side, and that is why they're trying as of now to prepare the massive attack on those territories of both Luhansk and Donetsk region, which were previously and as of now they are still controlled by Ukrainian government. This is one reason, let's say political and military one altogether. But the second idea why this area and why offensive in this area is so important now for Russia, because actually maybe the most effective divisions of Ukrainian army are situated there, because simply there was the front line in Donbas, and that is why the most effective military units, they were grown up, if I may say so, in Donbas. But in comparison to the previous period of this war, after large invasion on February 24, as of now, both authorities and all the people who have any kind of access to the media, we are all asking and urging people and begging even civilians to leave the area, because the heaviest battles so far, they are already in Donbas. In my native Luhansk region, around every town there is a serious battle going on for a couple of weeks already, and the situation will get worse.
Maria Zolkina in Warsaw, thank you very much. We'll get back to you very shortly. Our third guest this evening, Nikolai Petrov, Senior Research Fellow, Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, joining us from London. Nikolai, we can see you, we can hear you, we think. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. War crimes, how best can justice be served? What has to happen, do you think?
I think that we are confronted with a situation which was never experienced before, when the country which is committing these war crimes is Security Council permanent member. And this is exactly what President Zelensky did tell recently when addressing the UN, how exactly United Nations can deal with Russia if it sits in the Security Council, and how exactly the tribunal, which is inevitable and which will prove all these atrocities, how it will affect the further fate of those who are responsible for doing what they are doing now. So I think that it's absolutely needed to publicize information which is coming now, and perhaps even more horrible situation is in Mariupol, where there is big city and Russian army perhaps is not even eager to leave from there, and the number of victims there, of casualties there, will be or can be much higher. So the information is coming that they are using now mobile crematoriums to destroy evidences of those crimes committed. But I think that regardless of how exactly results of the tribunal can lead to punishment, it's absolutely needed now to gather as much information as possible and to make it public.
Nikolai, you're just coming out with that phrase about mobile crematoriums. It kind of really sends a shudder down the spine, doesn't it? That's sort of the idea that this kind of like disposal unit is rolling around to get rid of the evidence. It's just horrific. Nikolai, thank you very much for the moment. Antonio Guterres has called for an independent investigation of all the incidents that are taking place in Ukraine. The Secretary General of the UN speaking of deep shock at hearing eyewitness testimony of violence perpetrated by Russian troops beyond the limits of the Geneva Convention.
The war has led to senseless loss of life, massive devastation in urban centers, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. I will never forget the horrifying images of civilians killed in Bucha, and I immediately called for an independent investigation to guarantee effective accountability. And I'm also deeply shocked by the personal testimony of rapes and sexual violence that now are emerging.
So Antonio Guterres there in New York. Meanwhile, in Washington, Joe Biden, the US president, denouncing war crimes in Ukraine. Let's take a listen to US President Biden.
Civilians executed in cold blood, bodies dumped into mass graves, a sense of brutality and inhumanity left for all the world to see unapologetically. There's nothing less happening than major war crimes. Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable. And together with our allies and our partners, we're going to keep raising the economic cost and ratchet up the pain for Putin and further increase Russia's economic isolation.
Joe Biden there, Antonio Guterres before him. Let's go to Warsaw. Maria Zolkina there waiting for us. Maria is a political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation, but also from Ukraine. Maria, when you hear those things listed, the war crimes from the mouth of Joe Biden, when you hear Antonio Guterres speaking about his deep shock at what he's hearing, how does that leave you feeling?
I would say that even Ukrainians have never expected that the level of cruelty against civilians, and not just civilians, because civilians are also different, that the level of cruelty will be so serious and so barbarian, I would say, because when we have seen raped kids killed after that, so any person in Ukraine could say any word, I would say. Here in Poland, where I am, so number of underage girls are accepted in Polish hospitals after massive rapings and after being beaten. So I hardly can imagine how these young girls will be able to live further. But I would say that that kind of shock, which was experienced by Ukrainians, it was even strengthened after the list of sanctions which were imposed by our Western partners after this Bucha massacre. Because Ukraine expected that, so to say, this kind of cruelty will be enough for a number of our Western partners to stop, to launch, for instance, even if not full embargo on gas and oil supply from Russia, to cut off the sources of financing this cruel war for Russia. But at least to have some kind of plan how these supplies will be reduced significantly to make Russia suffer financially from the point of view of getting every day billions of euros for the gas and oil supply to European Union and to other Western states. But we haven't seen that. Instead of embargo on oil and gas, which will be really harmful for Russia, we have seen some kind of embargo on coal. And after that, our shock, let's say, is not gone. Because the next question from Ukrainian side, both from society and also from authorities, is the same one. So what should be done by Russians in order that the Western partners will hear Ukraine and cut all the possible sources for Kremlin to conduct this cruel and bloody war against civilians, because they do not want to fight with army. They have shown to the whole world that they are fighting civilians, and that is why after that Ukrainian civilians from Luhansk and from Donetsk region are really listening to authorities, really listening to everyone who say them, please leave the region as soon as possible, because in case you are there, on the one hand, Ukrainian army will be not able to fight as they would fight in case there is so many civilians. But on the other hand, in case you are there, you will be just in a trap if Russians will occupy some new towns there.
Indeed, caught in the crossfire is an expression that comes to mind, and it's an horrific feeling to sort of imagine that is going to happen anytime soon to people perhaps that you know. Maria, thank you very much indeed. We'll get back to you very shortly. Back to London to Nikolai Petrov from Chatham House, Senior Research Fellow in Russia and the Eurasia Programme there. Nikolai, Maria was talking about the sanctions, and obviously we're talking like some 20 billion euros of business being sort of wiped out by these sanctions, coal primarily. We had an expert on earlier on talking about the fact that Russia could, or rather, the West could sanction oil. It's a possibility that could happen. And that would really stymie Russia in many ways, take away large elements of its income. Is there a sense that the sanctions just aren't going to work? New sanctions, of course, coming from both the US and from the EU.
I think that sanctions do work. And I would say that Putin's regime is deadly wounded by these sanctions. But sanctions cannot work immediately. And even if cut off all oil and gas coming from Russia, it will not force Putin to stop the war immediately. Russian economy is suffering and will suffer even more so. So I would say that, in my view, what's going on with regard to sanctions, first, sanctions are very painful for European side especially, not that much for the United States. And I would say that, in my view, Europe is doing almost its best in order to increase the pressure of sanctions. But besides this, I think we should think in terms of the military aid which is given to Ukraine, perhaps even the military involvement of volunteers coming from the West, and a kind of negotiations which should somehow stop the war now and help to avoid many more victims.
There have already been, Nikolai, just to stay with you for a second, you mentioned avoiding many more victims. There have already been so many, haven't there? And in places like Mariupol, we don't yet know really the extent of the damage there, do we?
We do not know the real cost, and there are different news coming from there speaking about tens of thousands of civilians. Mariupol is a big city, and the war is going on there from the very beginning. The whole city is almost destroyed now. So we can only guess what is the real human cost.
Nikolai Petrov of Chatham House, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to the studio where we have criminal and human rights lawyer William Julier. Thanks for being with us, of course. Great to have you here, because we need your perspective on this one, because what we're talking about here is really emotive. And I mean, clearly Maria is talking about this very calmly and clearly, but you can sense, and it's understandable, there's a real sense of being shaken by what's going on, and that's very human. We hear from Nikolai as well, great analysis, but people perhaps not looking with a legal head. Putting on a cold, calm legal head now, William. Where do we go from here? How is the case made? Is it enough to see the news reports and all the horrible things that have been reported? There's more evidence need to be gathered.
I'm not sure there's a need for much more when you hear that children, young ladies, maybe men have been raped. You've got evidence, you've got victims for the ones who are still alive. We know that there's a tremendous help from the Polish police, from people on the ground, also NGOs in Poland who are speaking to these victims. We've got the statements, and then it's a question of who can be indicted if someone can be one day, and how high up can it go. And for that, I'm not sure one day there will be a parallel with what happened in the US, but Donald Trump was considered to be responsible for one of his speeches for what happened afterwards on the Capitol. And will it be possible to say that what Vladimir Putin said when he made these speeches about rewriting history, about what these people were allowed or not allowed to feel as being Ukrainians, and that it did not make for him any sense to feel as a Ukrainian and not as Russian somehow in history, maybe has a connection with these atrocities. So maybe he did not give the order to rape these people, but somehow we know that there's connection between high-level political speeches and what happens on the ground. So that's maybe the number two thing that will need to be considered in due course, which is how do you connect these ground atrocities? I don't think, to answer your question, we need much more. But then there will be need to connect these atrocities with higher responsibilities. And I think that this is something that some people are already working on.
Volodymyr Zelensky has called for, when he spoke to the UN 24 hours ago, he talked about a Nuremberg-style tribunal. The Nuremberg trials, of course, after the Second World War, convicted lots of Nazis of atrocities. Would that happen?
There's been talks already to know whether there will be need or not to create a special mechanism, a special international criminal tribunal for Ukraine. Symbolically, that would mean a lot. And as I said, there's a lot of people are saying, okay, international organizations don't work, Europe doesn't work. We know many people in some countries thinking that it's better to get back to, being isolated as a country. We see here that if we don't group up on international levels, there's no sanctions. Sanctions are Europe. Today, people are happy that there's Europe because sanctions are what they are. So there wouldn't be any international justice if they had not been the atrocities of the Second World War. So I've always supported these institutions, and we understand now that they are the only ones that can bring some hope and some help to the populations where things are going really where they are going now in Ukraine, meaning in direction of the worst possible. So, yeah, I think that maybe there will be a special mechanism. And if there's not, I do think that there are going to be cases brought before our legal systems on universal jurisdiction, or on other legal grounds. And I do think that this is not going to go.
William, thank you. We've heard from Maria about Polish girls being seen in hospital suffering real trauma after what happened to them in Ukraine. We've heard from Nikolai other stories. Sergei Lavrov is Russia's foreign minister, mouthpiece of Vladimir Putin to the world. Lavrov has called the Allied reaction to the revelations of atrocities in places like Bucha hysteria, his word. He's used the now recognised Russian denial and deflect blame method. So if you still doubt the eyewitness horror stories and the news reports showing the destruction, then there's also now, according to German intelligence, satellite images that show Russia's denial over Bucha is not tenable. So for the record, here's Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister.
На днях очередная фейковая атака была предпринята.
The other day, another fake news attack was undertaken in the town of Bucha in the Kyiv region after the Russian military had left according to the plans and agreements. Several days later, a fake video was staged that is now being spread through all media channels and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
I'm going to get off the fence and say fake news. Russia would know all about fake news, given the amount of manipulation Russia's taken part in things such as the Brexit debate in the UK, which Russian money was poured into as well as part of, some say, a plan to try and break up the EU by forcing one of its main members out. There you go, off the fence completely. I'll get back on it now and let my guests do the talking. Nikolai, can I bring you in to talk about this one? Nikolai Petrov. Fake news. Where does Sergei Lavrov think he's going by making these kind of accusations about fake news, given Russia's track record on that same issue?
I think that what we see now with regard to Bucha was going on recently with regard to Malaysian Boeing, when Russia did come with several different alternative explanations. And the very idea is pretty clear. If you are showing several different options, and it's possible to demonstrate that, well, not everything is so clear, and somehow to hide the real truth. But now, in case of Bucha and some other places in Ukraine, I think these tactics does not work anymore, except for Russia itself, where the information space is totally dominated by state media, and where Russians in general are eager to listen to these lies, because it's impossible to live with truth and to think about your leadership as war criminals. And Sergei Lavrov is clearly one of these leading war criminals.
Nikolai, thank you very much indeed. Just explaining to people who are watching this, Nikolai mentioned the MH17 Malaysia air crash. That was the incident on the 17th of July 2014 when an aircraft flying over from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur crossed Ukraine was shot down over the east of Ukraine. It turned out that the weapon that hit it was from the Russian-controlled part of that area. I'll just say from my perspective, and I'm sorry to get personal again, a former colleague of mine was on that flight and he died, obviously, with everybody else. So in memory of Glenn Thomas, let me celebrate you now, sir. William, the situation as we're hearing it, you've got Sergei Lavrov saying what he's saying with no shame, with no sense of any justice.
I'll tell you what I think
defending.
About that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Mr. Lavrov could be one day facing questions from a prosecutor.
Seriously?
Yeah, let's say he is.
Because I think he should, but
yeah,
you tell me
maybe
legally
he will.
whether it
Let's
should
say
happen.
he is one day. He will have to explain why he said publicly that this was fake. If you are aware that crimes have been committed, the best way to acknowledge that you knew is to deny them. This is what often people do when they are accused of having committed a crime. If you don't know, then you usually say, listen, I don't know. I'll have my guys investigate this. And if responsibilities come to the table, then we will prosecute the soldiers who did that. This is sometimes something that we hear. Somebody who is saying nothing happened, all this is fake, and we've got evidence that is not, is for me, evidence that he is involved. We'll see how that goes in court, but if I was prosecuting this, I would be happy that he made that statement.
William, thank you. Maria, can I bring you back in? Maria Zolkina in Warsaw from the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thanks for being with us. We're appreciating what you're telling us. When you hear Lavrov's words, what kind of thoughts go through your head?
First of all, one thought regarding, besides of course, emotions and everything, and the need to say as much truth about this war to the world as possible. Another thought comes to my head these days, and I wanted just to return to what my colleague in the studio has already said, that war crimes are the crimes of universal jurisdiction. It means for our general understanding that people can be prosecuted in any country, actually, which is a part of the system of international law. They can be caught, they can be persecuted if this or that country specific where the person was caught was part of, let's say, investigation team. And that is why these days we are thinking about the fact that this is not only Putin or Lavrov or Gerasimov personal responsibility for what was going on and what is still going on in Ukraine, but this is the responsibility of concrete executors as well. And the more countries will be involved in terms of their law enforcement bodies, in terms of their prosecutors' offices and judicial systems into investigation and into making everything possible for all these people not to have their life come for all the coming years, the better will be, not just for Ukraine, not just for the victims we have already lost, but for the system of international cooperation and the human rights system an international arena. And that is why this is the phase, I think, that what we have seen in Borodyanka, in Irpin, in Bucha, and in other satellites of Kyiv, this is the face of not just Putin, this is the face of Russian army. But Russia, as some people used to say, that army represents society itself very, very often. And unfortunately, this phase of Russian current society believing in all this propaganda is not as nice as a lot of people in the West still would like to think.
Maria, thank you very much indeed. We're going to show a map now of the area that Maria was talking about at the start of our programme, the area where basically Ukraine is telling its citizens to evacuate because of the risk that they could be under, evacuate or die was the message, basically. You see here the Lugansk, Donetsk areas there, the oblast, I believe is the correct word to use. You see the red area, which is occupied by pro-Russian separatist factions, and that, of course, is one of the pretexts of Vladimir Putin's invasion. The idea now, Kharkiv, Lugansk and Donetsk under real threat now of Russian bombardment. Maria, we've got the map on the screen now. If you can tell us, where you're from, where you know, and what the risk is going to be to those areas, you think?
My native hometown is on the very front line, so almost like 10-15 kilometers from Luhansk, actually. So it was the only one checking point in Luhansk region working before recently. But the most important battle is, as of now, is going on around Izium, which is also on your map. This is the town in Kharkiv region, but it is very important both for Ukraine to keep the defense line from the north, and for the same reason it is very important for Russians to break this defense line of Ukrainian army, because in that case Russians will be able, let's say, to encircle Ukrainian army in Donbas from the north, from Kharkiv region, to invade massively from Russian Federation territory in the east of Luhansk region, and to continue offensive from the south. And this is the worst scenario for Ukrainian side. But as of now, as I have already said, these battles, especially in Luhansk region, very heavy ones, they have already been held for a couple of weeks already, and as of now, Russians haven't succeeded in breaking that division line, nor in Luhansk and Donetsk region, neither in Luhansk and Donetsk region, nor in Kharkiv from the north. But we hope that it will continue like that. But of course, Ukrainian army and number of officers with whom I have been in a permanent contact, they have been saying that we are absolutely capable. We are keeping the defense line, but we still needs like a more heavy, let's say, artillery, which was already promised by the UK, for instance, and we still need to secure our sky with due to supply of anti-missile systems and air defense system for Ukrainian side.
Maria, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to London. Nikolai Petrov from Chatham House, Senior Research Fellow, Russia and Eurasia Programme. Nikolai, this next move in the conflict, this push by Russia to basically all-out attack areas around Kharkiv, Lugansk and Donetsk. What do you think the effect of that will be? I mean, clearly, there's going to be a lot of destruction, a lot of death. What do you think this will mean for the next move in this conflict, in this war? What do you think the outcome will be?
I think that Russian army did fail in the first and the second stages of the war, so it was unable to control territories which were initially planned to be controlled. And now it concentrates on, Donetsk and Luhansk regions in order to restore, how they are explaining these borders of Donetsk and Luhansk self-proclaimed People's Republics. And we've seen on your map the fact that Russia controls now the whole belt along the Sea of Azov. And that's why Mariupol is such an important part of the story, because it's located on the Sea of Azov. And now we do see that Ukraine is separated from the Sea of Azov. So Russian army now tries to realize much smaller, but nevertheless very serious goal, and to come with certain results before any kind of negotiations will be continued.
In terms of the territory that's been taken, Nikolai, it's hard to imagine Ukraine wanting to give that up in any agreement, and it's hard to imagine Russia wanting to give that up either. Are we at a sense here where there is no room to sort of negotiate at all, even if we could get them round the table and make some progress?
So far, if to speak about negotiations which did already take place, there is almost no overlapping between positions of Russian and Ukrainian side due to understandable reasons. But we do know that the peace will be concluded after the end of the war, and the goal of both sides is connected with the idea to control as much territory, Ukrainian territory, as it's possible in case of Ukraine, and to capture as much territory as possible in case of Russia. So we should not think. I think in terms of the possibility to end this horrible war in near future, and the problem is how to start with getting ceasefire, how to stop these casualties to happen, and then how to put the end to the criminal Putin's regime, which will be understandably, or can be understandably, the end of the war.
Indeed. Stoltenberg warning, Nikolai, staying with you for a final question to you, sir. Stoltenberg warning everybody in NATO to be in this for the long haul. This isn't going to end soon.
I'm afraid that it will not end very soon, but it's understandable that Putin is short of time, so he's trying to get any results which can be presented to justify what's going on, at least in Russia, as soon as possible. And it's understandable also that it's impossible to live for long being under those sanctions which are already implemented by the West and which will be implemented in near future.
Indeed. Nikolai, stay with us. We'll get back to you for another comment before the end of the programme. William, just on that issue of sanctions, we're just hearing today that Vladimir Putin's daughter is among those who are sanctioned. Obviously, there's a lot of money swashing around with the senior figures in Russia. Lavrov's daughter apparently buying a property in London for cash. And if you live in London, you know buying a property is quite a major investment. And if you buy one for cash, you've got to have a lot of money, possibly a shed load of it. It's an enormous thing. So one can only imagine how that money's been gained by the likes of Lavrov, who essentially is a politician. But, you know, there we go. Politicians in one country, politicians in another country, the different set of rules, clearly. And as we know, Vladimir Putin's making up his own rules. Russia's outside the jurisdiction of the international courts. Putin probably thinks he's someone who can do exactly what he wants. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not completely outside because the assets are often outside of the country. And a lot of these people holding properties, holding boats, holding cars. And we hear about that as lawyers because we have colleagues who are advising some of these individuals. And there is panic amongst the highest level of businessmen who used to be on top of the world. And even the very rich ones don't feel very comfortable with the fact that their 700, 500 million, 200 million boats are going to be taken from them. So they're not completely outside of the system. The other thing that I would like to bring to the table, and sadly, we're not hearing enough about Russian voices against Ukraine war. I happen to have a couple of Russian friends, Russian colleagues. Some are still in Russia, some are not in Russia anymore. And even these colleagues who are not in Russia, they don't feel very comfortable speaking out. Publicly, they can't, but even privately, because there is terror within Russia. And there have been laws passed that enable the regime to shut down people in prison for years and years and years, knowing what happens in Russian prisons. Before the war, there was a lot out there coming out regarding rapes in prison and so on. So there is also this issue that a lot of people in Russia are voiceless but are against what is happening. And I think also that a word needs to be, addressed to these people because they are also suffering and not everybody in Russia is happy with what's going on. The problem is how can we get these people to help us in what we're trying to achieve, which is stop the war. that's another issue.
Indeed, it's giving them the power of being able to speak out, which of course has been denied to them by the very structures put in place by those who wish to keep them under control.
Problem with all dictators.
I was going to say, some people call it a dictatorship. You took the words out of my mouth, sir. Thank you very much indeed, William Julier, a criminal lawyer, human rights lawyer, here in the studio. Let's go back to Warsaw for a comment from Maria Zolkina. Maria, do you know? We've heard from William about he knows Russians who are against the war. I don't know what your circle of contacts is, but you must certainly know of some Russians who, maybe have reached out to you and said, "Look, we think this is crazy."
Honestly speaking, from those Russians whom I knew before, with whom I had at least some contacts, I haven't seen any excuses, any things like "we are sorry." I have seen but instead of that, I have heard a lot of things like things are not as clear as they seem to be. And of course, one more issue is that a difficult choice for our European friends, but this choice is not very difficult for Ukrainians. When Russians strive to say that, listen, we are not our regime. On the one hand, it sounds like pretty rational, especially for the Western Europe. But at the same time, if you will come to Ukraine, to Poland, to Baltic states, let's say, relation of the people towards this kind of formula is absolutely different. There is political collective responsibility. Because if Russians failed to develop more democratic and pluralistic state like Ukrainians succeeded to do, this is the problem of the Russian society. And this is not the problem of the European Union or of Ukraine. And that is why, unfortunately, for some minority which still can be within Russia and can be against Putin regime, but if they keep silence, that's their choice, regardless of under what conditions they live. And that's the choice to stay part of this majority. And as a result, they anyway will be, taking this collective responsibility.
Maria,
However,
there've been Russians who've protested, Russians who've been arrested. I take it you would applaud their courage for doing that.
Yes, but unfortunately for us, both Ukraine and European Union states, the number of protesters in Russia was 6,500 people at the end of February and at the beginning of March, on one day. At the same time, while the general population, as we all know, more than 140 million.
And that statistic, I think, really sums it up, doesn't it, Maria? Thank you very much indeed for being with us. We always appreciate your input. Maria Zolkina, political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation, joining us from Warsaw. Maria, just to remind you, from eastern Ukraine, she tells the story from the heart and bases it on fact. And that's exactly how we're trying to tell the story here at France 24. Thank you to Nikolai Petrov, joining us from Chatham House in London. Nikolai, Senior Research Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia Programme. Nikolai, thanks for being with us. We always appreciate your time too. And thank you to our guest here in the studio, the criminal and human rights lawyer, William Julier, for your analysis with a cool legal head, but also with a finger on the pulse of the human aspects of this story too. We appreciate your words, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mark, for having me.
Stay with us here in France 24. The story, of course, continues. We continue to follow all events as they happen in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us.